بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome once again to another episode of Islamic Politics in America, a show pioneered I should say, by Hazrat Mufti Muneer Ahmed Akhoon Sahab, with this vision and mission of looking at Islam and politics and how they're both two beams of the same light, for example. They both have the same source. There's no politics without Islam, and there's no Islam without politics. Those two things go hand in hand. Now, of course, as if you've been following along on all our episodes, we've been delving into that aspect by looking at different topics in the first segment and then following it up with an Islamic lens in the second segment, where we get an Islamic scholar to come in and chime in and shed a light on those issues and topics. I think last week was a good primer of what I want to talk about for today's topic, for today's episode. If you'll remember, we talked about this importance and idea and the notion of Muslims, especially young Muslims living in the West, living in America, Britain, Canada, North America, living in non-Muslim lands, and how there's an importance and a need to be unapologetically Muslim, right? There's this need that we as Muslims should show our Islam in any which way possible, whether it's the wearing of our hijab, or our kufi, or topi, or the keeping of our beards, or the praying 5 times a day. And I mentioned some stories regarding that idea of how important it was for some Muslims, young Muslims, going through high school in the West, in this country, having this need to pray Jummah, to pray Dhuhr, Salah, and many other things while they were at school. And I hope that one of the big messages we can take from that, from those stories, is this need and this idea to think bigger. Not just think of, when Friday comes around, I can just have my dad or my mom come pick me up from the school, and I'll just go with them to the mosque for Jummah, and that should be it. I get to get off from school a couple hours early every single Friday, and that's it. You don't know how many other Muslims are living or going to the same high school or same college as you, and there's an importance and a need for you to think bigger, to plan bigger, and get these Muslims around with you to start inculcating those Friday prayers, eventually, hopefully, scaling that up and creating your own MSA, for example, as well. Now, for today's topic, I want to start off with a little story of hopefully some positivity and something good to think about. And hopefully, maybe you'll think of the story even more and think about how you live your life as a Muslim, as a young Muslim living in this country, living in the West, living in these non-Muslim lands. The story I want to talk about today is very well researched, and I very much want you to, after this episode, go and do your own research and go and do your own homework and look this up, either Google it, YouTube, anything else. But the story comes from a documentary done by a government-funded channel, the PBS, the Public Broadcasting Service. And this Public Broadcasting Service, PBS, put out these documentaries about certain Muslims living in America. And I want you to think, who's the earliest Muslim that comes to mind for you when you think of Muslims living in America? Who's the earliest Muslim that comes to mind? Maybe it's Muhammad Ali, right? The great big boxer, the black African-American Muslim. Maybe it's someone before that or someone after. We keep thinking and hearing of the first-generation Muslim, and then the second-generation Muslim, and now perhaps, according to some, we're in that third-generation Muslim, that those who came first in the 60s or 70s or even before, those are the first generation, and now those people are grandparents, and they have a third generation of Muslims who are living and being born in this country. But you'll be surprised that there were Muslims long before that. And the story I want to talk about today is a man named Mamadu Yaro. His name is Mamadu Yaro. Some say his name is Yaro Mamut. Some places it's Mahmoud Yaro. But Yaro, this man, was an African-American Muslim slave. You know, you might have been taught of the transcontinental slave trade that took place in the Americas, where from 1200 onwards, British people were importing slaves from Africa, especially West Africa, into North America, amongst other places. But you know, it's funny how we're never taught who those slaves were. And by some accounts, 15 to 20%, maybe even by some scholars, up to 30% of those slaves that were coming from modern-day Senegal, Mali, Ivory Coast, etc., that West Africa portion, were Muslims. Up to 30% were Muslims coming into America to do slavery, to be slaves to all these slave owners, work on those plantations, or help create houses and buildings and so many other things in this country. Mamadu Yaro was one of those people. SubhanAllah. By some accounts, according to his own account, he says that he lived up to 130, 134 years old. Some scholars say that that is true. Some say that no, he didn't live to be that old, but he was still very much someone who lived a very long life. By some accounts, he lived up to 80 or 84 years old. But safe to say, he had a very long and prosperous and, mashallah, fulfilled life as a Muslim. Mamadu Yaro comes in about the late 1700s, 1800s, and he comes to America. This is around the time of the Revolutionary War, etc. as well. And he's sold off to a slave owner in Washington County, by some accounts, in Maryland, the state of Maryland. And he's a Fulani Muslim. He was someone from West Africa, you know, modern-day Senegal, Mali, etc. And he's sold off into slavery to a slave owner in Maryland. He was pretty young then. Some say in his teenage years, some say in his early, late 20s. And as he's sold off to a slave owner, you know, he's taken away from his own sister, who was also sold off right in front of him, and taken away from his whole family back home. He then starts to work for this slave owner in Washington County, Maryland. And many, many years go by, and Mamadu slaves and toils, you know, tending to the farm, the sheep, the harvesting of the crops, the making of buildings, and any other things that the slave owner's family may need. And many years go by, and he stays a true slave to this slave owner. But this slave owner was different to other slave owners, because this man, who had purchased Mamadu Yaro, had said that if you create a brick house for me and my family, lay it brick by brick and create the whole thing, then I will set you free. If you create this big house for me, brick by brick, I will set you free. You can get your freedom. That is the recompense. That is your cost. And so Mamadu says, okay, you know, if I can be a free man, why not? And he starts laying brick after brick in Washington County, Maryland, to make this house for the slave owner and his family. And eventually, in the making of this house, the slave owner grows sick and he passes away. And so, you know, you could think, well, put yourself in his shoes now. Am I going to be able to still get my freedom, even if I do complete this house? And so, subhanAllah, the slave owner's wife was very sympathetic to Mamadu. And she said, you know what? I want to do good by the promise of my husband. And so when Mamadu Yaro finishes laying brick after brick of this house, the slave owner's wife gives him his freedom and says, from this day forth, you are a free man. You can do whatever you want. You're no longer a slave. You're no longer chained in bondage. SubhanAllah. You just think about, you know, the emotions and the feelings and the thoughts going through Yaro's mind at this point, right? Like, what is he thinking? What is he feeling? SubhanAllah, for the first time in a long time, ever since probably he was born, he is now a free man. And by many accounts, at this time, he was in his 60s or late 60s. So, a rather old man. He's seen much of life, and he's a free man. So he travels, leaves Washington County, and he comes upon Georgetown, not too far from the nation's capital, Washington, D.C. And he settles down there, and he starts doing work for random people. And this is now, this isn't indentured servitude where it's, you're doing work, but you're not going to get paid. You'll just get, fed and clothed and basically treated as a slave. This was, you're going to do work, and you're going to get paid money in exchange of it. You're a free man. And so he starts doing this work for random people, and he starts making money. And after saving up about $100, think of $100 probably in today's money, maybe $1,000, $10,000, who knows, a good amount of money. He takes those $100 and he gives it to a friend who by some accounts was a merchant dealer or something. And so he gives that money to him. And unfortunately, after giving the $100 to his friend, somehow in the friend's work or something, he misplaces the money and he can't find it. And so there goes the $100 that Mamadu Yaro had worked and toiled so hard for to save money for himself. But Mamadu Yaro was a very industrious, full of, a jovial spirit, full of positivity kind of person. And so he says, okay, you know what, I'll lose $100, I'll restart again, start making more money. He starts doing more work, starts working for random people once again, starts making money, starts saving it. He saves another $100. This time he gives it to another friend. And SubhanAllah, whatever his luck or whatever the circumstances life throws at him, those $100 that he left with another friend also go down the drain. His friend somehow used it in stocks or gambling or something, and those $100 go all down the drain as well. Now, 2 times, I think he's lost a good sum of money now, and by this point, if I was in his shoes, I'd be pretty sad, thinking very negatively about life and everything. But he, SubhanAllah, was such a, as I said, industrious, very larger-than-life personality, very positive, full of positivity. And he says, okay, you know what? I get hit back down, I'll get back up again. And he starts making more money, starts working for random people again, starts saving money, starts doing all this work and getting money. And this time he saves up to $200. And after those $200, he decides, he was told by a friend to, you know what, the national bank has been made, and maybe it would be good for you to put that money into the bank stocks, and that way you'll get more money. And so he puts that $200 into the bank's stock, and by many accounts, eventually he's able to get more and more money out of that, make a living out of it, and eventually with that, more than $200 presumably, he's able to purchase land. And so Mamadu Yaro, this man who lived so many years, spent so much of his life as a slave, not able to own land or learn to read or write or any of those things, now is suddenly a free man who's made enough money to purchase his own land. So on his own land, he starts building his own house, just like he had for his slave owner. And this time he finishes his house, and he's able to have his wife and children also live in that same house again, all over again, SubhanAllah. And that is pretty much how his life turned out to be, SubhanAllah. And by then, he was able to live with his family, with his wife and children, and they say that eventually he passed away at either the age of course, as some say, 80, 84 years old, or of course by his own admission, lived up to 130, 134 years old. But safe to say, a very, very long life. And one of the more important points to make here about Mamadu Yaro is that many people, white, non-white, Muslim, non-Muslim, especially the non-Muslims around the area, knew Yaro as this Mahometan, as Muslims were called back in the day, or Muhammadan. There's many different spellings for that and throughout history as well. But he was considered a Muslim, someone who followed the teachings of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And many people remember him as this very big, larger-than-life personality, but also that he was very much abstaining from eating pork and the drinking of alcohol. These were two things that everybody knew about Mamadu Yaro, that he was a very ethical, moral person, morally upright, and he never drank alcohol and he never ate swine. And other than those things, they also mention how this was a man who would be praising God at all times, praying to God at many points in his life, and also singing or recanting verses. So essentially, the non-Muslims knew him as someone who would recite the Quran as well, subhanAllah. And I think that's very important and pertinent to mention, subhanAllah, that here is a man, a Fulani Muslim, someone who spent years in bondage as a slave, a Muslim man, African American, and he spends all his life living as upright a life as a Muslim as he can. SubhanAllah. And so the lessons that I want us to take away are really just two. One is that Muslims, as we are, should be optimistic about the future. There's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ as well, in which he talks about how a mu'min is one who is positive. A mu'min is one who always thinks the best of other people and other situations and of himself, subhanAllah. And a Muslim is someone who thinks well in all situations. And the second point I want us to think about really more deeply is kind of his legacy, like what happened. We talked about legacies in our last episode as well in some respect, about sadaqah jariyah and doing good things that lead to a continuous charity, doing good things that would lead to something continuing well long after you have died or have long passed. Creating an MSA so that once you graduate, even after that, the MSA is still there and people can benefit from it. And in the same way, we have to think, although, of course, subhanAllah, this is a great story, there are some things we can learn in the sense of what happened afterwards. Why is it that Mamadu Yaro was a Muslim who lived during those times, yet in his lineage it seems like as if people, or those in his progeny, or his offspring, perhaps didn't take up the faith as much as he did. And so it's a good reminder for us as Muslims to think that, sure, at one point, we are blessed to think that we're not the only ones here. Muslims were here long before Christopher Columbus even found America, right? But also, we need to be careful of our offspring and our progeny and the generations that come after us. The generations that come after us and the generations that come long after we are gone. We need to make sure and keep in our du'as and our actions this steadfastness and hope that those who come after us are also on the deen of Islam as well. So I hope that with this story you're able to take some lessons, especially these two, but also reflect and think and internalize within your own selves what it is, subhanAllah, about Muslims in this country that, we weren't here in the 60s or 70s, we were here back in the 1700s and maybe by some accounts even before that. This fact that Muslims have always been here. And so we shouldn't think in a way that, we weren't here, we were only here in the 60s or 70s. We shouldn't be thinking bad when people talk about Muslims as the other, or this derogatory thing, or these people were barely even here. There's a huge legacy that Muslims have always had in this nation's founding, in the Revolutionary Wars, in the wars afterwards, in the Civil War, and throughout this nation's history you will find some footnotes of Muslims somewhere in some place at some point in time. So with that, we'll conclude this first segment, and we'll see you right after this break. Assalamu alaikum.
The future of halal real estate financing is here. Break free from interest-based banks. Using blockchain technology, Ethi is the first ever halal crypto token backed by rent-to-own real estate. Ijara CDC is offering a limited-time pre-sale offer to buy Ethi tokens. At just 1 cent per token, it only has to go to 2 cents to double. Approved and halal certified by Grand Mufti of America, Dr. Mufti Muneer Ahmed Akhoon. Be a part of the halal crypto revolution. Call 1-866-GET-ETHI. That's 1-866-438-3844 to buy Ethi tokens.
And welcome back. Thank you so much for joining us on Islamic Politics in America. This is the second segment, and we're going to welcome our esteemed scholar, Mulana Muhammad Tasin Akhoon. So, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
How's it going, man?
Everything's good. How's it going with you?
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah, doing well. So, what topic do we have for today, for the Islamic segment?
Today we're going to talk about the foundation of civilization, Islamic civilization, or Muslim civilization that started, of course, begin with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Then after that, the Khulafa Rashidin, the companion of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and it paved the way for the Muslim from all over the world, rather be from dynasties coming from Africa, from the biggest dynasty that we had in modern time, you could say, was the Ottoman Empire. So that was the main pave and the principle that began from Khulafa Rashidin. That was the main source they would look back to. And I would just run through that. And what is Khulafa Rashidin? What is considered Khulafa Rashidin? The rightly guided caliphate and the leaders. Of course, after the demise of the Prophet ﷺ, Islam was there were people who were apostate. They started leaving Islam, and certain people in power, they started considering themselves to be prophet, because they saw the success that Rasulullah ﷺ had in a very small period of time, and they thought this was one of the way of success for them. So they started claiming falsehood, false prophecy. And at that moment, the Sahaba, they were dismantled. They couldn't believe Rasulullah have left this world and had passed away. And it was to a point that Umar bin Khattab, that he pulled his sword out and he says, anybody says that Rasulullah passed away, he's not going to have a good day. That person's not going to have a good day. And some of the Sahaba, they started saying that just like Musa alayhi salam went to Mount Tur, and he would come back, in a couple of days. So it's a couple of weeks or so. it's not a big deal. So it was a shock for the Sahaba. So at that moment, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, who was the closest companion and the closest friend of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he was also emotionally, hurt as well. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is not in front of him, so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him the courage to stand at that moment and tell the Sahaba that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in other words, he said that he passed away, that he passed away, he died, to make it affirm that this is done. So if that happened, are you going to go against the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And he motivated them, inspired them, put up and got them together, and he recited the famous ayat where he says that if Rasulullah passes away, that you go back to your old habits, go back to your old religion. And then he went after the people who claimed false prophecy and united the Muslim at that time. United the Muslim Ummah at that time. They were dismantled from all over the places and got in hold of the Muslim at that time when they were completely emotionally disturbed. And he established the 5 pillar, where 5 pillars with people have to pray 5 times salah, and they have to give zakat, and to a point that Umar ibn Khattab, let's just take it slow down, and he said, "Oh Umar, you have become soft, and before Islam you were very extreme into your religion, and as you came in Islam you became very soft. So you're preventing me from going out and fulfilling the orders of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala." So that gave encouragement to the Sahaba. And main principle it is fulfilling the orders of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's what it was to him. And he fulfilled and continued he became the first Khalifa, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu.
Because he was going after those who were not giving zakat.
Giving zakat, because everyone thought that we don't have to fulfill these orders that Rasulullah had told us about, or the Quran is telling about. So they were all over the place. Umar bin Khattab, Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, established those orders of ahkam of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at that time, after the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And it was a very successful khilafat at his time. It was very successful khilafat, and he ruled for 2 years, 2 years 3 months, and then he passed away as well. And he's buried in Jannatul Baqi, and he was Khalifatul Rasul. And many stories that comes that he wasn't just that he became a king or leader and left all his service as what he was doing before. So the next day he continued doing the service of his neighbor, milking the goat. So the Sahaba, they came saying, Khalifatul Rasul, that what you're doing, you're Khalifa now, and you're still doing these. It shows leader. He said that is it upon me to leave the leader, that I became a leader? Does it mean that I leave my services to the humanity? So that was one lesson that we learned from him. Many lessons that we learned from him, that he continued, showed humility and lead the Muslim Ummah. After the demise of Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, Umar bin Khattab, he became Khalifatul Mu'mineen and Al-Faruq, and many virtues have been mentioned, and he ruled over 10 years and 6 months, and at his time he was the first one to establish system for the Muslim governance system. So the system was established at his time. They were given authority as governor of different places, and accountability from them, and auditing became more prevalent at his time. That everything would be noted down, audited, and would be presented to the Khalifa. Nothing was just that you could do whatever you want to do. It was everything was accountable of. And the welfare project he began at his time, and Baytul Mal banking, Islamic banking began in the time of Umar bin Khattab, and many inventions that we see in other civilization and also Muslim civilization began at the time of Umar bin Khattab. And then fuqaha took a lot from the Khilafat of Umar bin Khattab. he changed the entire face and atmosphere of Muslim civilization at his time, in that time. And famous story that we know of, that he would patrol himself, would go out, and he saw a woman, boiling stones, and when to soothe her kids.
Right.
So Umar bin Khattab, when he saw this, and he became, he became very sympathized with this woman, and he went to Baytul Mal, carried flowers, and carried a flower. The slave that was with him, the servant that was with him, he said, Amir al-Mu'minin, let me carry it. And famous line that he said, are you going to carry my abode, my deeds on the day of judgment?
Allah.
Are you going to do that for me? And as a Khalifa, he went and he served the woman till he saw a smile onto the kids and to the woman. And she didn't know this is Khalifa al-Mu'minin Umar bin Khattab. And she's saying that she's criticizing Umar bin Khattab. She's a wish that Umar bin Khattab, the Khalifa, our Khalifa, could be like you. And so, and in the next day she finds out that this was Amir al-Mu'minin that came to your house and served you. So to that point, he gave service and implemented justice. Court system were established in his time. Qadi, Qula, and everything was established at his time. Now we have patrol police officers, and so it was established in the time of Umar bin Khattab radiallahu anhu. Himself also went out and patrolled. And unfortunately, he was assassinated in Medina, and as I mentioned, 10 years and 6 months he was a Khalifa of. And after assassination, when he passed away in Medina, next thing that came was Uthman bin Affan radiallahu anh came in Khilafat. Uthman bin Affan radiallahu anh ruled almost for 12 years. In his time, as you know, Umar bin Khattab have established civilization and basically pattern, and it's running very smoothly.
You got a system going.
So Uthman radiallahu anh continued that same system, and he even strengthened it by establishing different militants in his time, and with his own money, with his own efforts.
Wow.
It wasn't effort. It wasn't the money wasn't taken from the government, but it was his own personal generosity that he did for the Muslim Ummah. And service areas were established, the wells were established, where the places there was no water in the time of Uthman radiallahu anh. And also a biggest achievement Uthman radiallahu anh has was accordance to the Quran was already collected. In his time, the copies of Quran were produced for different areas of the Muslim, and as you know, Islam has spread all the way past Iran, entire Middle East, and some parts of 1/4 parts of Africa is under the thing, and some of the parts of China, of South Asia are under Uthman radiallahu anh. So now Quran were written and were spread in time of Uthman radiallahu anh, and his attachment to the Quran was very strong. That when he was assassinated, that he was reciting Quran, and to a point that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam told him that the cloak of Khilafat would be put upon to you. Make sure you never take it off. And there was a siege around the government house of his house, and he was ordering him to resign from Khilafat, but he did not resign, and he said that Rasulullah told me not to, and neither he allowed his army, even though, as I mentioned, he funded the army and he had power, and so he did not allow the army to go have civil war. He said, I do not want any bloodshed of the Muslims to be done in his time. And they were ready, the Sahaba, they were ready to protect him, and so, and that's how he was assassinated. He was assassinated while reading Quran. That's how attachment that he has with the Quran. So this was one of the biggest accomplishments. Uthman bin Affan and the Nurain, they call him the two lights, because he's the only person in the world, in the history, that married the two daughters of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in different times. And after that, of course, the Imam Ali karramallahu wajhahu come into place. He becomes the Khalifa, and he went through a lot of challenges at this time. So fitna began in time of Uthman radiallahu and end of Uthman radiallahu an, and it continued in Ali radiallahu an. And his significance was to establish justice even at that time when there was fitna, where you could lose yourself and you could, play with your emotions and be radical and, do anything. But even at that time, he was establishing justice to Quran and Hadith and what the previous Khulafa have done.
And how many years did he rule? Sorry,
Uthman.
Ali radiallahu.
Ali radiallahu ruled about 4 years and 9 months. About 5 years he ruled, and he was assassinated. And at his time, the Muslims were, as we know, Rasulullah gave him the title that he's Babul Ilmi wal Qada, that he's the door of knowledge. So knowledge was spread at his time. A lot of wisdom was given to the Muslim, the Ummah at his time. And as I mentioned, in the time of there were so many fitnas, there was enemies that were all around, and at that moment to establish justice, and you could be, extremists and go against, go with your emotions and leave the orders of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Even at that time, he continued fulfilling the orders of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. One other thing that happened in time, the Darul Khilafa, the basically you could say the capital was moved from Medina, from Hijaz to Kufa, and it was moved to Kufa. Reason was that Medina was very far because now Muslim lands are being spread throughout all Middle East and to other lands, and this could have been the middle point where they could connect with the capital.
Right. So Kufa was in Iraq.
Iraq, yes.
Right.
Nowadays, modern days Iraq, you could say. And he was assassinated. As I mentioned, a lot of fitnas were surrounded by, and misconceptions were created between the Sahaba, and they had no enmity towards one another. They were just fulfilling their orders as they understood from Allah and Rasul, that we need to establish, the battle between Aisha radiallahu anha that took place. It was because of the enemies between, as you know, nowadays politics, that's where the divide and rule, that's one of the main agenda for the politicians, to win over certain groups of people, and that's called dirty politics. So that's what started happening with the righteous Sahaba. Between them, there were people in between that were just causing friction between them, but they had no enmity towards one another. They loved each other for sake of Allah. And so, and he was assassinated in Kufa, and his Khilafat comes to end, and then the Khilafat goes into his son Imam Hassan radiallahu an. Imam Hassan radiallahu an ruled for 6 months, and he also he gave away the rights of Khilafat to Amir Muawiyah radiallahu an, because he saw that there was two Muslim groups. There would be a clash between them, and there would be a bloodshed of the Muslims. And Rasulullah also predicted, and he fulfilled the prophecy of Rasulullah that this son of mine would unite the Muslim, and he united the Muslim through giving away his rights as a Khalifa to Amir Muawiyah radiallahu an. And he went back to Medina, and he stayed in Medina, and he was poisoned. They said that he was poisoned, and that showed, the person who gave up his power for the unity of the people of the Ummah. And that's what we learned from his life. and then other is Amir Muawiyah radiallahu anh, Katib al-Wahi. He was the one who used to write as the revelation was revealed onto Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He was one of those that would write. And
he wasn't the son of Abu Sufyan, was he?
Yes, he was the son of Abu Sufyan. Abu Sufyan radiallahu anh, who was one of the chief, one of the leaders of Quraysh at that time. And Amir Muawiyah is his son, and he was a Katib al-Wahi. He would write Wahi. And at his time, he ruled for a very long time, about 19 to 20, 19 years, 4 months. In his time, a lot of now civilization of the Muslim is all are being spread throughout the world, and it's running very prosperously, and there's no issue in the time of Amir Muawiyah radiallahu anh. And he was sitting at a place where there was borders with the Roman Empire. So he started bureaucracy at his time, and he was the first one to start the navy for the Muslims. So he's the first one to start navy for the Muslims, and many achievement for the Muslim civilization, Islamic civilization that took place in time of Amir Muawiyah radiallahu anh. So after Amir Muawiyah radiallahu anh, as you know, fitna rose. There was a dark history of Islam after Amir Muawiyah radiallahu anh, and to a point, very dark history that came upon. You know, when something there is, you know, to its peak, there's also a decline, and there's also you could say the evil part of the civilization, beautiful civilization. And from those you also learn a lot of lessons from it. And then it rose back after Amir Muawiyah, that they say Khulafa, amongst the Khulafa Rashideen. Some people, they say that no, he wasn't, his Khilafat turned into Mamlukiyat, turned into kingdom. But according to Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, that he was also Khalifa, amongst the Khulafa Rashideen, rightly guided Khalifa. Yeah, it might seem like he was the Muslims were so wealthy, so so blessed at that time. In his time, it seemed like it was kingdom, but it wasn't anything like that. So anyhow, in the Umayyad dynasty continued from Amir Muawiyah, and one of the king that they say he's amongst the Khulafa Rashideen is Umar bin Abdul Aziz. Umar bin Abdul Aziz. They call him the Umar Sani. He's the second Umar, coming of the second Umar. And he has relationship. He's from the lineage of Umar bin Khattab radiallahu anh. And in his time, even though he grew up in royalty, as soon as the Khilafat was put upon to him, he gave away all his luxury to protect the Muslims, and he went through poverty to a point that they gave everything to, even jewelry of his wife was given to Baytul Mal. And in his time, the economy became so prosperous that there was no one to give zakat to. So people would leave the zakat outside, and there was no poverty at all. They didn't know where to give the zakat to. That's how much prosperity came. But as for himself, would not have anything luxurious, and then he said, "I would be accountable in the day of judgment." There's a famous story comes. So the wife of Umar bin Abdul Aziz said to tomorrow's Eid, the kids don't have new clothes. Can you make a request to the Baytul Mal and get something for Eid? Our guests will be coming from different areas, and our kids don't have new clothes. So you could just imagine how much poverty that he's going from, where there's no one to give zakat to, just for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to unite for the civilization of the Muslim Ummah, because these people became the example and became the principle for all the other civilization later on. So there was no excuse they had made. So he goes to the person who's hold of the Baytul Mal, the treasury, and he said, "Listen, can you owe me some money? I need to buy clothes for my kids." And the person was so righteous as well and will hold him accountable. And he said, when will you give back? He said, I'll give you back, I'll give it back to you. You lend me some money, I'll give it back to you. And he said, I'll give it back to you the next day or some other time. He said, what's a guarantee that you'll be alive the next day or not? And then he comes back with disappointment. He tells him that I had no answer to. I don't know when I'm going to die. Tells his wife, and he wasn't able to buy new clothes for his kids and for his family for day of Eid. And he's the Khalifa, and he's the king of the Muslim, and that's what the sacrifice they had made for the Muslim Ummah. So that became the principle for all the other dynasties, as I mentioned, usul, the beginning point of everything, and the thing everyone that falls back to, even till this time, that Muslims, when Muslim countries and so, they look at the examples of Umar bin Khattab, Abu Bakr, Uthman, and Ali radiallahu an, Amir Muawiyah, and also Umar bin Abdul Aziz. They became the example and the principle and the pillars for the civilization, Muslim civilization. So that's why it's easy for the Muslim world. Any dynasty that rose from Africa was easy for them to every civilization has one thing common: service to the humanity and establishing the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's what the starting point of the Muslim civilization began from.
SubhanAllah. Jazakallah khair for that wonderful overview of how that all came into being. I think one thing I want to really hit home on is this point of how public service is about servicing the public, about serving the public, subhanAllah. And that's, I think, a point that comes up a lot in all of these khalifas and in their lives.
They became the example of justice for this time, and anyone that Muslim countries or so, they'll give example of theirs. They're like, hey, these people are like this, despite having, hoarding money or anything. Allah had given them such honor that was still keeping their name alive through their example. So they didn't make any excuses. I mean, they could have, they could have, done something, but they did it for the services to the Muslim Ummah, and they knew that there's a generation after that is looking upon us, looking for us. That's what.
For sure, yeah. I mean, I think back to Abu Bakr radiallahu anh or Umar radiallahu anh could do more important things than carrying a bag of flour for one lady and her children, or milking the cows of some other neighbor, But they thought of these things as very paramount and tantamount to their role of public service and being a khalifa, being a leader of all of the Muslims. And so I hope that that's something we take away from this discussion, and discussion and conversation as well. And also this fact of the usul, as you mentioned, the ethics and morality and being moral and standing firm in your ideals is also just as important. It's important to hold yourself to account before anyone else. And I think that's also something in our first segment when we talked about Mamadu Yaro. That's also something that came up. He was a very morally upright person who did as much as he could to stay on the path of Islam, subhanAllah. So with that, I hope we'll take away some of these things from our two segments, and I hope you'll let us bid adieu until next time. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.